Hello and welcome to Business 101 Online. I am your course instructor, Heather Hines. Today we're going to be discussing Chapter 11, Human Resource Management, which covers quite a lot of material. Human Resource Management covers everything from working with managers to understand where you need to hire employees, finding employees, compensating them so you can retain the good employees, and then figuring out how to monitor the employees and maybe fire them. So, quite a lot of material goes into human resource management. When you think about human resource management, you need to make sure that it aligns with your organizational goals. So, remember, we have different organizational structures. We have the line organizational structure and then line and staff. So, human resource is just part of the staff structure that you need to still discuss with them, the HR department, what your organizational goals are so that they can align with company goals. Human resource management has increased, the role has increased. Why? Because of increased recognition of employees as a resource, and we'll talk about in just a little bit, and then changes in law that rewrote old workplace practices, which we will also discuss. So we'll talk about why has HRM increased in just a few slides. In the last few chapters, we've discussed that the service and industry has increased in the U.S. So, because of service and other high tech manufacturing increases, we have also needed employees to meet those highly technical job needs. These workers are scarce, and it makes recruiting and retaining them very difficult. Here are some more challenges in finding high levels workers. Um, If you are in my course, this links to your last question for Chapter 11, Critical Thinking number 5, where it asks you to explain why companies are having difficulties finding qualified employees. Well, there's a huge shortage of trained workers in many areas. We're advancing in technology on a regular basis and at a very rapid pace. And because of that rapid pace, we haven't really been able to keep up with training the workers, right? It takes time to educate and train workers for each sector. So now we have a shortage. And also, we are competing with global markets. So we might have global markets with low wage workers and other markets that might be hindering finding high level uh, employees. In addition, we have increasing benefit demands and benefit costs. Um, the cost of healthcare has dramatically increased over the last decade, and so that's definitely a challenge for companies to meet that need. You know, they need to make a profit and they also need to compensate their employees really well. So that's definitely a challenge. And also a decrease of employee loyalty. What do I mean by that? Well, before the baby boomer age, baby boomers would generally find a job they liked, and if they liked it, they would basically stay there 30, 40 years and then retire. But now you see a lot of people, they're getting jobs, and now with the internet and more information out there about different jobs, they are constantly looking for other opportunities to increase their wage or to move up in their pay grade. So they're looking at other jobs, other competitors, and it's easy for them to find new jobs. There's headhunters, so employee loyalty has dramatically decreased. People in HR definitely need to be up to date on current legislation and events that might impact employment. So in 1964, there was Title VII, which basically said that it is illegal to discriminate based upon race, religion, creed, sex, age, and national origin. And that created the EEOC, or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Later, in 1972, the Equal Opportunity Act gave the EEOC the ability to issue guidelines for employer conduct record keeping, and they were able to enforce their guidelines. As years have gone by, other So other areas not covered by Title VII have said, "Hey, what about me?" So now we have the Americas with Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, which discriminates, which says you can't discriminate based upon any physical or mental impairment for certain sectors. Now, this doesn't cover every sector. If you're a welding company and somebody can't physically weld, then you are not obligated to hire that person. But if they can complete the task, even with their disability, then you cannot discriminate against them. And then there's also age discrimination, which only covers those people who are 40 and over. So make sure that you understand that's only people who are 40 and over, and that will help you answer critical thinking question number 4 this week. And then Civil Rights Act of 1991 increased Title VII and said, hey, if you're a victim of discrimination, then you have the right to jury trial and maybe the ability to get compensation for damages. Now, all this legislation has led to a couple things. Some controversy. The EEOC that we just talked about in the last slide, it has tried to kind of tilt the scales towards increasing opportunities for minorities and women through affirmative action. But through that affirmative action, they have come under scrutiny for something called reverse discrimination, where it's becoming increasingly difficult for members of dominant majority, for example, white males, in order to get into colleges, in order to gain employment because of reverse discrimination. And this has been under debate in many lawsuits. So, as a company, not only do you have to make sure that you are not discriminating against minorities, but you also have to make sure you're not just doing reverse discrimination against the majority. Here's a slide that kind of gives you a visualization of everything that we're going to be talking about. This encompasses just about everything that HRM is in charge of, which is quite a lot. They need to make sure that they're aligning with the organizational strategies and talking with management. Then they have to do all this job analysis, forecasting, and we'll talk about each of these in turn, and make sure that they are also in compliance with laws that we just talked about. Here are the 5 steps of human resource planning process. Now, notice that this is just a planning process. Remember in the last slide, we had all this. This is just a little piece of the pie. So these are the 5 steps of just the planning process. So HR planning requires that they prepare an inventory of who they have currently, and then prepare a job analysis. They do that by talking with management and figuring out, okay, what are the various jobs and job titles, what do we need those people to do. So we're going to create a job description and job specifications. So job description says what you're going to be doing, and job specs says what are the minimum qualifications that you need to have that job. And then in part of the planning process, they need to assess the future human resource demand, assess the future labor supply, and establish a strategic plan. So quite a lot. How do they find different employees? Well, they can use internal sources such as transfers and promotions, but that's kind of a limited pool. If that doesn't complete all of their employees' sources, then they need to go to external sources, job fairs, maybe former employees, private employment agencies, so on and so forth. Once they find an employee source, then they're going to go to selection, hiring, orientation, and training, which we will be talking about in turn. So let's talk about the hiring process. The hiring process is recruitment. That's when you are trying to find qualified people at the right time. Once you find qualified people, then they submit the resume, and you go through the selection process, which is to gather information on those individuals and then determine who you should hire. The 5 steps of selection are to obtain complete application forms, conduct interviews, give your employees tests. You need to do a thorough background investigation, and sometimes people skip that step, and you really don't want to, because it's really hard to go back and say, "Oh, we missed this." Especially, let's just say you hire somebody with a criminal background, and you forget to do a background investigation, and then that said employee injures another employee. Well, you can be sued because you didn't conduct a thorough background check. Obtaining results from physical exams and establish a probationary work period. So saying, hey, we're going to hire you, but it's kind of we're going to it's going to be probationary until we make sure that you are the right fit for our company. After the hiring process, then you want to train and develop your employees. Training should be an ongoing process to increase productivity. Training is short term and development is long term. When you're doing training and development, you need to make sure that you are constantly assessing the organization's needs. They change. That you're designing the training activities to meet those needs, and then you're doing some follow up. You're evaluating the effectiveness of training. So, how do you train? You can do orientation, which is typically pretty boring. You can do OTJ, which is on the job training, apprenticeships, or job simulations. All right, so we've talked about finding employees, selecting them, hiring them, and developing their skills. This should all be done with management. But HR has to work closely with management, so they're going to focus on what's called management development, which says, hey, they need to make sure that they're educating current employees to become good managers. Because a lot of managers are promoted from within. So you might have management training. And you also want to be consistently talking with management, getting them involved with HR, because you need their input and their support for performance appraisals, which is just an evaluation of the employees on a regular basis, right? If you don't do performance appraisals, then you don't know if your employees are doing what they should be doing. There's something called a 360 review, which is becoming more and more popular, which is just basically where instead of you have the manager doing the performance appraisal, now the manager is getting input from people at different levels to get kind of a holistic idea of that person for the review. There are 6 steps to a performance appraisal, which are in the following slides. And in order to really to help your employees to feel like they belong in the organization and to hopefully retain those good employees, you want to discuss with the managers some networking and mentorship techniques. Networking just means, hey, let's maintain relationships with others, and mentorship is where you might have managers start to guide more on a one-on-one basis and think about how can they sponsor these employees and make them feel included. Now, why are we talking about managers so much? It's because one of the biggest reasons why good employees quit is because they are unhappy with management. So when managers complete their performance appraisal, they need to make sure that they are working with HR to do the following 6 items. They want to establish standards. They want to communicate those standards, so they shouldn't be a secret. They should let you know, hey, this is what I expect of you. They should regularly evaluate the performance against the standards and discuss that. So not only should they be watching their employees, but they should also discuss with the employees, hey, you're doing a good job in this sector, but you kind of could be working and improving in this area here. They should be taking corrective action when necessary and using the results to make decisions. So here are some do's and don'ts of performance appraisal. You can kind of read this on your own. But basically, you should be making sure that you're giving sufficient time, that you're speaking one-on-one with the employee, that you're not yelling at the employee and making them feel uncomfortable. It should be an act of constructive criticism. As part of the 6 steps of the appraisal, we talked about using the results to make decisions. So, what decisions am I talking about? Well, here are some decisions that you can use performance appraisals for identifying training needs, for promotions, for recognizing the achievements of your workers, and for evaluating the effectiveness of your orientation process and improving upon that. As a manager or in the HR department, some of the common errors when you're completing a performance review is the contrast effect. You don't want to compare one employee to the other, kind of like as a parent. That's the big no no of parenting. You don't want to say, hey, you should be more like your brother. They don't like that. You shouldn't use the halo effect where you're allowing your initial belief or your initial interaction with that person to kind of cloud the judgment in other performance areas. So, for example, if they do a really good job in one sector, you should make sure that you're continuing to evaluate each performance evaluation separately, not allowing one area to cloud your perception. And the similar to me effect, you don't want typically, and this happens a lot, and it's really hard to avoid. You generally, those people who are like you kind of understand them, so you might give them a more favorable appraisal because they're like you rather than because of what they're actually doing. All right, so we just talked about aligning HR with the organizational standards, how to design a job, their forecasting and planning, employee recruitment, employee selection, training development, performance planning and evaluation. Now we're going to talk about compensation and benefits. As an employer, you want to have competitive compensation. Why? You want to attract and retain your good employees, and you want to give them incentive to work efficiently and productively. So you can use different types of pay systems. There's a lot of individual pay systems which are the most popular, and there's also some group pay systems which we'll talk about in just a moment. So individual pay programs, those are salary, hourly, and your piecework. You can also have some bonuses. You can have bonuses based upon commission. That's maybe a percent of how much you sell. You can have a bonus plan where you have extra pay based to recognize employees for exceeding or meeting certain objectives. You can have profit sharing, and this is becoming more popular, profit sharing and gain sharing plans. Profit sharing is an annual bonus based upon the company's profits versus gain sharing plans, which is a bonus based upon achieving certain goals. And then stock options. Stock options you see a lot with the C-suite, your corporate executives. That you hear a lot about them getting stock options. And that's also popular, becoming more popular, not just for your C-suite, but for all employees. And that just says, hey, you have the right to, at some point in the next 10 years, you can buy stock, 1,000 stock at today's price. Maybe today's price is $20. And so then in those 10 years, maybe the stock jumps from $20 to $100. Those employees could say, hey, sweet, I'm going to exercise my stock options right now, and I'm going to buy those 1,000 stocks for $20 and turn around and sell them for $100 per stock. So basically, they just made $80 per stock times $1,000. So that would be a gain of $80,000 for that one employee. Now, teams are becoming a little bit more popular. So now we have team-based programs. They're very challenging to implement. The two most common types are skill-based and gain sharing. So we just talked about financial compensation, let's talk about benefits. So, benefits, fringe benefits, are additional compensation to employees beyond based wages. They're becoming increasingly popular. In 1929, they accounted for about 2% of payroll. Now it's 30% plus. And one of the biggest increases in fringe benefits has been health care. So, fringe benefits are company cars, healthcare, dental, all that good stuff. And fringe benefits don't have to be just, hey, here's our fringe benefits package. Now we see what's called a cafeteria style fringe benefits, where some companies are allowing employees to choose, hey, I want these fringe benefits, and they get to pick and choose what they like up to a certain dollar amount. So, for example, you might, if you don't have a dog, you might not choose the doggy daycare. There are a lot of challenges that managers are going to face when they're if you are working for a global company, and that includes compensation, health and pension standards, paid time off, taxation, and communicating. So these are basically just the normal issues that you'll face when going and thinking about going to other countries. As one of your fringe benefits, you can include different types of flexible scheduling plans. So there's flex time, where basically you say, hey, workers, you need to work 40 hours this week. Don't care how you get them, just get them done. But you might have some different parameters like core time. So all employees are expected to be on site when our customers are on site. So maybe from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., everybody has to be there. But maybe you get there at 6 and leave at 3, or you get there at 8 and you leave at 5. So that would be flex time. Compressed work week. That's just where instead of working 5 days a week, you might be working 4 days a week. However, that might reduce productivity because of the long work hours, so be careful with that. A lot of people like it, but it does tend to reduce productivity because of the long hours. Then there's something called job sharing, where you have two employees sharing one full time job. That, some people might say, hey, you're just trying to get out of paying healthcare and all those other fringe benefits. But there are a lot of people who really like just working part time. It increases the number of people who are employed, and it also increases productivity because they're working shorter amounts of time. And it decreases absenteeism and tardiness because you have two people who are having to rely on each other. So they're kind of working in teams. So it's going to decrease absenteeism and tardiness because now they're depending on each other. And then there's also home based work. Some companies allow people to work from home because of technology is increasing. So Bank of America is one of those companies that has allowed a lot of their employees to work from home. And then there's also a lot of small businesses where that are home based. Home based works, here are some pros and cons. You have increased productivity. You're now, because you're at home, you are able to be at home, less commute time, so on and so forth. But it does have its challenges. It makes job appraisal really difficult. Your workers can feel isolated. And how are you going to promote and reward those people? So you have to figure out how to address these challenges if you are a company that allows your employees to work from home. Hopefully, this was a helpful lecture. Please comment to let me know how I can improve the lectures, or if you like the lectures, what are some pros and cons. And don't forget to take your quiz and complete your homework.